test. This is rock and roll. Time to rock it from the Delta to the DMZ. Is that me or does that sound like an Elvis Presley movie? Viva Da Nang. Oh, viva Da Nang. Da Nang me. Why don't they get a rope and hang me? Hey, it's a little too early for being that loud. Hey, too late. It's...
Good morning, 8th period, and hopefully the rest of the class. Alright, we are going to continue with part 3 of the lecture series of Vietnam. Alright, so we know this is becoming an uphill within America and within Vietnam. We have the Diem assassinated through JFK. Then in turn, we know that JFK was assassinated. Could it be a conspiracy? I don't know. Then we know, so we have Vietnam, North Vietnam, and South Vietnam. The Civil War had occurred. France pulls out. In turning, the United States declares war. As a result, when the United States, they didn't declare war, but they issued what? That's right, the Tonkin Resolution, allowing Lyndon B. Johnson to actually go to war without officially declaring war. So they issued him the blank check, and in turn, we know that America started full force going into Vietnam, trying to get this, fight the communism, fight the domino theory that entail in everybody's mind was thought to be happening. However, in America, we know that the Vietnam War was causing more of a rift than it should have been. Every war that we've been into thus far, we know that usually a war brings people together and it unites a country as one front. However, Vietnam was an interesting war because it did nothing more than tear us apart. We had those that were anti-war and we had those that were pro-war. The draft is issued, and you have to be 18 to be issued into the draft. We have the draft loopholes, such as going to college, so we do have the high stakes of college entrances. And as a result of that, we have the 26th Amendment, again, which lowers the voting age to 18 because for the longest, you could go to war, but you couldn't vote. So the 26th Amendment abolishes that and allows 18-year-olds to not only be drafted into war, but allowed to vote as well. So, trying to look at the two now together. If we were to look at the United States at this time, they had the largest military in world history. As well, they had the knowledge of different kinds of things to attack the Vietnamese with. They had napalm, which was basically kind of like a flamethrower. We have herbicides and defoliants. These are different kinds of chemicals to try to do away with the underbrush of the jungle in Vietnam. 100 million pounds onto 10 million acres, 6 million acres. You can imagine the ratio of that. And then we had Agent Orange. This was the chemical combustion that was put onto the jungles to try to get rid of the jungles to allow people to be able to see and to kind of hurt the Vietnamese people from maneuvering throughout the jungles themselves. We also eventually had Rolling Thunder. This is the bombardment of a long 6 months where President Nixon basically just has this bombarding of bombs and artillery hitting and conquering Vietnam. We also and then we spent a lot of money. Vietnam, on the other hand, in 1967, has 97,000 people who work daily to repair roads and bridges, 500,000 of which are workers. Your peasants to middle class who just work daily to prepare for the war. We have the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which you need to know. I've said this a couple times. The Ho Chi Minh Trail that allows people to kind of go throughout. And if you want to kind of get an idea of what the Ho Chi Minh Trail is, here is an example. Of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and kind of its exact locations in Vietnam itself. So you can kind of see in this image right here where the Ho Chi Minh Trail is actually located. So you can kind of see how it goes from South Vietnam on up. And this was to allow for the North to supply their soldiers who were working down here in South Vietnam. And eventually the conflict became crazy whenever the Ho Chi Minh Trail started to actually go into other countries such as Cambodia or Laos, because these were countries that President Nixon knew that we really shouldn't be hitting, but he was targeting anyway because of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So, continuing besides that, um, they also had 30,000 miles of tunnels within the mountains. This is a very mountainous range. So obviously their tactics are so much different, so much more aggressive guerrilla warfare. And nonetheless, Vietnam and Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, they truly turned into their society as a total war. This was a total war effort to XA on all the people who were incoming and trying to colonize and develop government systems out of something that they didn't want. Then eventually we go into the Tet Offensive. This happened on January 31st of 1968. It was a surprise attack by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese which launched a massive surprise attack upon the United States and South Vietnam. The United citizens were shocked at how it happened. The North Vietnamese came in and entered the embassy. The media criticized the military for their war efforts. The media was hit hard in the fact of how the United States were caught by surprise and hit. The Tet Offensive is actually very important because Tet actually refers to kind of the Vietnamese New Year's holiday. So it was a holiday, and if you've ever kind of studied Ho Chi Minh, he is a very interesting guy. He had done a lot of readings on some of the great war heroes and kind of their George Washington and kind of different things that they did in their strategic efforts to actually win. So he attacks on Tet, and this is their New Year holiday. So when he does, it was a complete surprise attack and took the United States by shock. The media scowled over it and claimed that the United States could not win this war. The Tet Offensive ended up lasting for about a month. And nonetheless, after all the media criticism and the happenings of the Vietnam and how it was laid out, Johnson then announces later on in 68 that he would not be running for re-election. And this is because, his approval fell drastically, so he felt that it would be unnecessary to run. This led into Lieutenant William Calley and his platoon of soldiers that went into villages, clearing them out. This became known as the Ma Lai Massacre in 1968. This is where the United States citizens went in and killed over 300 Vietnamese civilians. Finally, the United States helicopters came in to stop, evacuated. But by this time, the United States cover-up, media had already been kind of forewarned about it and reacted in ways such as that the United States were going over there killing anyone in sight, that this war was turning into nothing more than a bloodshed of common people. It was highly criticized by the media and became one of the darkening points for the Vietnam War in the sights of the anti-war critics. And this did nothing more than help the anti-war movements kind of spur on their reactions and their feelings. Here's kind of the picture. You pause and you can look at it. Here's the My Lai Massacre, and just a quick shot of what it truly was. You can see these are children and women, and so it wasn't just they were soldiers. Here in America, what all occurred. We had the Chicago issue in 1968 as a result of Martin Luther King being assassinated, Malcolm X being assassinated. Riots broke out all over Chicago as a result of the civil rights movement, kind of where it was headed. Martin Luther King is assassinated, and then we knew then eventually in 1970 Kent State. We've kind of talked about this earlier, but this was a huge, large protest of students who were protesting the Vietnam War. They set out to kind of do more sit-ins and try to retaliate against the events of school in 1970. And then eventually the guards came in, opened up fire, and about 4 people were killed. Right here is someone who was actually not even a protester, but this was an innocent bystander who was shot and killed. And here's a reaction of his classmate. This became one of the iconic images of the Vietnam War and kind of its impact and what the Vietnam War had actually led to in America. People started resisting the draft, coming up with any ways, going to college when they usually wouldn't. Shooting yourself in the foot was often a good term. People would flee to Canada and do different kind of things, trying to weasel their way out of the draft. We had this anti-war movement. We had teach-ins, people who just literally did that. They would just sit in a place and just teach within there. If you'll look right there on the helmet of the guy in this picture, you can see he has a peace symbol on it. And the peace symbol, nonetheless, it was a helmet kind of proving that peace was showing that some of the soldiers were not in support of the war, however they had to be there. Most likely this young man, he was drafted. Going back to teach-ins, just kind of a brief over what a teach-in is. Teach-ins were similar at the time to general education. It was kind of like a forum, a discussion, political affairs. The only difference was that the main difference that these teach-ins were not limited to a specific time frame. They were basically meant to be practical, participating, and kind of orientated towards more action. These were more of lecturing kind of areas where deep discussions took place and questions, and an audience was welcome to come to kind of be a part of. These definitely became very popularized during the United States during the government's involvement in Vietnam. An example of a huge teach-in was the University of Michigan in '65, which began as a discussion of the Vietnam War. However, it ended in a huge outpour, an outcry. Here are some examples of peace. These are what was signs of nonviolent means in the Vietnam War. Often you would see these three symbols being symbolized of against someone against the war itself. We have the peace sign, the two fingers. We had the peace symbol, as many of y'all know, more of the hippies idea. Then we have a dove carrying an olive branch. The doves, these were referred to as people who wanted the United States to withdraw from Vietnam. That's why they were called the doves. They wanted them to withdraw. And then if you were labeled a hawk, hawk were those who wanted to stay in Vietnam. So the doves were to flee and leave, and then hawks were kind of more of stay and fight and more of very violent type positions. 8th period, right now, if you can pause and pause the video and answer this question: what were two events in Vietnam and two in America that showed the Vietnam conflict was hurting American citizens and America as a whole? Just real quick, and then continue back with the slides. Next, continuing, we had more. Here's an example of Vietnam vets who were against the war. You can see the protests and the silence talks between, 10 so dead. Silence is, when they said that the silent march, it was the dead, because so many people were killing. And actually, more people died at the later end of Vietnam when we were actually taking men out of Vietnam rather than at the beginning. And it was as a result of how the war had transformed. It left from just going in to stop communism, and it kind of developed into kill whoever's in sight. And with those mentalities and with those thinking, the brutality of how they attacked was a lot different. Other protests, here's an example of a extensive TV coverage of the Vietnam War was directly contributed to the widespread protests in the war. There's huge protests throughout, from the north to the south to the east to the west. Ultimately, this tore the country apart and divided us. Here's Chicago, kind of in 1970, an example. This was more of fight for the Vietnam, but also fight for civil rights. So this was an interesting era of protests because many times you saw two different versions or a couple different things that were in the same march or in the same protest all at the same time. Nixon, when he becomes president, he develops his secret plan. His secret plan. This is kind of what got him promoted and what got him, the job of becoming president. And within it, he stated that Vietnam, killed LBJ's presidency and the Great Society. Nixon won the election with a secret plan. The secret plan was, no one knew really what it was. People thought and hoped it was to get out of Vietnam and Vietnamization, the Phoenix program. However, in reality, there was no secret plan, and he states that later on, right after he has become elected, that there is no no secret plan, and that it was kind of all of a hoax. Alright, now, if you'll pause the video, or you can just click off this video and go to video 4, that will hopefully be the concluding video of the Vietnam War. After that, you can kind of just chill and relax. So stay tuned for part 4.